Easy peasy. I can do that.
I tend to ramble, so if I ramble, you just cut me off. I won't be offended.
So I don't know if you've watched Thursday nights. That's kind of what Thursday winds up being. 1 to 3 hours of random chatter.
Yeah, I jumped on. It was probably a few weeks ago. I jumped on one on Twitch for a little bit, and then because I created my Twitch account that night so that I could watch from there, and then now I can't remember my Twitch login stuff. Tried a few other times, so
That's awesome. All right. Well, it is. This is not my show. I got to start that over. All right. So Rick will just have to cut that off. Rick, when you listen to this, I apologize. I was about to start my spiel, not your spiel. All right, Heat Seekers. Welcome back to another edition of the podcast. I am not Rick Butts. I am not your host, but this is Brad Menendez. I am filling in for our fearless leader tonight. On tonight's episode, we're going to talk all things 49ers. We're going to talk skill position groups, talk about what we like, what we don't like, and what we think is going to happen this year and beyond. So, get your Jimmy G's ready, lace up your Deebos, and we'll get going. Tonight I got Taylor joining me, so thank you, Taylor, for jumping on. I appreciate your time, man. And everything is live, so we will get running. So let's start with the big names. Let's start with Jimmy Garoppolo and the quarterback group. How are you feeling about Jimmy G and bouncing back from the injury and year 2 in the Shanahan offense? I mean, what are you thinking about all that?
yeah. As I was kind of going through the position groups here, trying to see what I think about each player, whether they're overdrafted, underdrafted. I came across this common theme of just unproven assets, and I think Jimmy G falls right in there to where you've got such small sample sizes over the last couple of years. Obviously, he was a backup for a while, then some injuries have cut his season short. That I don't know what to expect out of him. He's a guy that I am not planning on investing on anywhere, especially in redraft leagues unless he fell to me later on. But I'm much more comfortable with those veterans that are proven, that are older, that you might be able to get down in that area, even like a Matthew Stafford type of thing. I just think we don't know. A lot of the news out of training camp is positive for him. But I know I'm a risk averse type of guy. And so he's just not someone I'm super interested in jumping ship for this year.
Completely understandable. It's tough when a guy bounces back from an injury. You never know what you're going to get that next year completely. Are they 100%? Are they ready to go? Especially because the injury happened during the season. I can tell you that he was projected to really shoot up the ADP, but right now he's sitting in the kind of the mid 100 range. So, at that spot, you could get somebody who's more consistent, less of an injury risk. So I think you're right that Garoppolo is a guy that if you can buy for cheap or you can draft really low, might be worth taking a shot on. But I wouldn't take him as your QB1 because you never know if he's really going to be healthy. We don't know what we're going to get this year until we see him do it. That being said, while we're still talking about quarterbacks, he had two guys fill in for him when he was injured, C.J. Beathard and Nick Mullins. So in the dynasty aspect, are you handcuffing Garoppolo if you've got him? Do you go get Nick Mullins or Beathard? Or do you just say, forget it, trade Jimmy G, be done with San Francisco quarterbacks?
Yeah, I just didn't see too much out of those other two guys that I would be really interested in burning a roster spot. Of course, if you're in a dynasty and you got two quarterback league and it's deep rosters, sure, because they very easily could be thrust into starting action with an injury. But if I have Jimmy G, I'm not necessarily targeting those other guys just because I think the injuries are so hard to predict. Whether he's injury prone or whether they've kind of just been freak accidents, I don't know. But yeah, I think they were kind of they were okay guys, nothing special. So I don't see a whole lot of high ceiling for them. And I think they both have a pretty low floor. Obviously their floor is not getting in at all, but even if they do get in the game, they can really tank you some weeks, I think. So
yeah, with Garoppolo, if Garoppolo's not healthy, then that really does call into question, what you'll do at quarterback. I can say as a team last year, A Shanahan-led offense led to 4,200 yards passing and 26 touchdowns. So it's definitely acceptable numbers from your quarterback if if you've got the guy there. Um, it's not as long as Garoppolo is healthy at least.
Yeah, and I think in the 10 games Jimmy G's played with San Francisco where he hasn't, I think there was one game, I think he had like 3 attempts or something because he got injured early. So in the games that he's actually, I think, attempted at least 10 passes, he's only thrown for over 300 yards in 2 of those 10, which is, I mean, 300 yards these days is not really a huge threshold to hit. He's got a 12-8 touchdown to interception ratio in a San Francisco uniform. So he just doesn't, he kind of, I think, just doesn't inspire a lot of excitement in me. He's just kind of a meh guy.
Just a guy.
So, yeah, he's just a guy for me, not someone I'm super interested in.
Our fearless leader likes Jimmy G. So he says here in the Facebook group, in one QB, I have 0 issues with Jimmy G as my QB. I would like him a lot more if if he would get a little bit more rushing involved. Last year he ran 8 times for 33 yards, which is like a 4.1 average. It'd be nice to see a little bit more. Because the numbers aren't bad. Something in the line of 4,000 yards and like 25 touchdowns isn't terrible. But if you could add some rushing to that too, that would be just even that much nicer. So I'm not huge on Garoppolo, but I'm not sold out on him either, though. I'm not going to get rid of him if I've got him because you have to hold him and see what happens. But I'm also not going out of my way to get him either. I've not traded for him or tried to trade him away anywhere that I've got him. Okay, so that being said, let's hit the running backs, all 78 of them. So we know their depth chart is quite lengthy when it comes to running back. Obviously, they paid Jerick McKinnon a bunch of money last year to come there and get hurt. They've got Tevin Coleman they paid this year, who comes over from Atlanta. He's been banged up a little bit here and there, but not nearly as bad as McKinnon. Obviously, Matt Breida's still there. Jeffrey Wilson, Raheem Mostert. There's a lot of running backs there. What's your take on this group of running backs, Taylor? How you feel about them?
Yeah, I mean, San Francisco as a whole is just an offense that I don't love. Many of their pieces, their running backs, notwithstanding there. So I think out of the 3 guys that we'll talk about the most as being potentially fantasy relevant between Coleman and Breida and McKinnon, I think Breida is the only one that I'm somewhat interested in. He had a decent year last year, almost 1,000 total yards. But really his stiffest competition in 2018 was Alfred Morris and Jeff Wilson. So I think a lot of that, those numbers were, the volume was out of necessity, not necessarily because he's super talented. Coleman, I think, his ADP is kind of what's driving me away. He's going to be in a committee. And even last year, and what we saw is kind of a career year where he sort of took over that workhorse running back role when Devontae Freeman went down. Still rushed for only 800 yards, 4 or 5 rushing touchdowns. I just don't think he's got a very high ceiling. So I guess if he's my running back 3 or 4, I'm cool with that. I can throw him into a flex spot and know he'll put up decent numbers. But if I'm relying on him for consistency week in and week out to be as like a running back 2 or something, if I went heavy wide receiver, I just wouldn't be super comfortable with that.
Sure. Well, and statistically speaking, so last year, a Kyle Shanahan offense in San Francisco led to about 423 rushing attempts for close to 2,000 yards and just 7 touchdowns. So that's a lot of rushing attempts and yardage to be had. Alfred Morris had 111 carries, so that's 111 carries that'll be left open. Obviously, Matt Breida led the team in rushing last year with 153 attempts. But it'll be interesting to see how they disperse the ball between those rushers because they have a lot of guys that are kind of similar in what they can do. I thought we saw Breida develop better between the tackles last year than some of us expected him to be. But they're all really good pass catchers, so that'll be interesting to see how that turns because that's probably another 50 or so targets that the running backs got last year. I don't remember the exact number, but I know it was over 50 targets.
Yeah, and I think something with those backfields too is today with a lot of the NFL going to committee backfields, it's easy to just say avoid them all. But I think the difference here with San Francisco's and others that might be discussed is, like you were saying, I think all of the San Francisco running backs are pretty similar to where I don't know that there's one that's going to jump ahead of the rest and become kind of leading that committee. Whereas some of those other teams, you've got the Patriots, where we assume Sony Michel is going to be leading the ground attack. Even when you had the Saints the last couple of years, you knew Kamara was going to be able to get his. This just screams three guys, or at least two of those three. I don't know what McKinnon's going to be. Really splitting things right down the middle, and it would just be so hard to guess week in and week out which one's going to have the good game and which one might, struggle early on and then not play the rest of the game. So it's just, again, it just seems like a dart throw, and not something I'm super interested in investing in at their ADP right now.
Yeah, it seems, and just reading through our chat, it seems like folks are not huge on McKinnon for the most part, and it looks like the Breida Coleman group is the is the party that people in the chat want or think is the most valuable. We've even got one comment. Breida is clearly the best runner of the group, in my opinion. So we got some Breida fans in the group.
I think when I was looking at the Fantasy Pros ADP, Breida was going roughly 70 picks later than Coleman. That's why I think he would be the one that I would most likely roster if there was a draft today, just because I think Coleman was in the right upper 50s, lower 60s, something like that, if I'm not mistaken. So like a 5th or 6th round pick, I'm not super interested in taking Coleman there on a guy that's going to be, like I said, splitting some carries. But if I am getting Breida that late, and we saw that he can, almost 1,000 total yards last year in a pretty bad offense, with all the injuries to Garoppolo and the wide receiver core. I mean, I'll take a shot on it, but again, it's kind of like with Jimmy G. There's no one here really excites me too much or exudes a whole lot of confidence.
Yeah, if I'm looking at running backs, I'm probably going to start elsewhere, and if one of these guys falls, maybe I take a shot on him. Breida's probably. I have a couple of shares of McKinnon that were depth guys that I've had for a long time that just never found the value and never wanted to drop for a someone else. So I've got a couple McKinnon shares, so I'll see what happens with them, and maybe I get lucky and I can flip them quickly. But Breida's kind of the guy that last year I would go after. So he's still kind of the guy that I would hitch my wagon to. I've never been a huge Coleman fan. Even coming out of Indiana, I wasn't the hugest Coleman fan. I think he fits really well with Shanahan and his offense, but I wouldn't be sold on him. I couldn't argue people letting this kind of slide and let other people take the chance on these guys, and I look elsewhere. 5th, 6th round, you could get a nice tight end, a nice wide receiver, still, things like that.
Yeah, I think the fall for McKinnon from roughly a year ago to today is just crazy, because I know when the signing happened, he was going to the Shanahan offense. Everybody thought the Niners were going to be a strong offense. He was going to finally get his chance as a RB1. This guy was commanding first-round picks and trades, and today he's probably third string on his own roster. So quite the fall for him. But I think if you own him, like you said, you kind of just got to hold on to him for now, because he doesn't have any value. Hope he has a couple good games, and you can flip him for literally anything.
That's kind of what I'm hoping for. So Rick wants to know, in the 6th round plus, who do you feel comfortable at? Who do you feel comfortable with at running back? So let's see what kind of guys are out there at that point. It'll take me a second to pull that up. So I don't really know who's going in at that range. Let's see here. All right, so around. All right, so about the position that we're seeing Tevin Coleman at, there are. Let's see here.
I'm looking correctly. It looks like he's going roughly 61st overall
Yep.
for Fantasy
So
Pros. So
James
around
White's
there,
going
you've
behind
got,
him.
yeah,
Darius Geis is going behind him. Lamar Miller's going
yeah,
behind him. Rashad
yeah.
Penny.
I think of those guys right behind him. Obviously, this is probably Lamar Miller pre Deontay Foreman release, but I think I would take him over Coleman. And I'm kind of assuming that again, everybody drafts a little bit differently. I typically, depending on where I'm drafting, obviously want to try to get one of those studs at the front for running back. But even in the first round, later first round, I like the guys like Mixon, David Johnson that might be there if Dalvin Cook's there. So assuming that I've got at least one of my running back positions locked down, I'm probably not looking for another one in that range. But I mean, I think it also comes down to what are you looking for. If I'm saying who in that range do I trust the most as my RB1, that's a little different than who am I trusting as my potential RB2 or RB3 if I went heavy early on in the draft. But a lot of those guys you listed, I think I like better than Tevin Coleman. Again, like I said, I'm kind of a risk-averse guy, so at least with James White, I pretty much know what I'm getting. With Lamar Miller, you know what you're getting, and I'll just kind of take that, hopefully, higher floor. Might not have a great ceiling, but at least I know they'll be able to put up some points each week.
Yeah, I would definitely consider James White, probably Darius Geis. But see, even Darius Geis, I need to see him bounce
Mm-hmm.
back from his injury. But I would probably consider both those guys before Coleman. The Lamar Miller thing for me, like, it doesn't make sense why Houston cut Deonta Foreman unless they had a plan, like something else. Lamar Miller can't handle the whole workload himself. I mean, you see him wear
Mm-hmm.
down, you see him be less effective as he puts more workload on his body. So Lamar Miller would scare me to the point where I would definitely probably just look elsewhere. You know, at this same range, excuse me, same range we're seeing Jarvis Landry, Hunter Henry, Eric
Mm-hmm.
Ebron. You know, if you're a Robbie Anderson guy, I'm not a big Robbie Anderson guy, but he would be someone there that has upside that probably is easily equal to Tevin Coleman. You know, Allen Robinson, and even just a little bit
Yep.
further down in the low 70s. I mean, Miles Sanders, Jordan Howard are both right there. I would just look elsewhere. I mean, Dante Pettis, another guy we're going to talk about tonight, is at 80. I mean, I would
There's
rather
so much
him.
wide receiver value there between rounds 5 and 9 or something that I'm probably going to be able to find a wide receiver 3 or 4 that I like better than my potential RB2 option of Coleman there. So, but I know I'm lower on Coleman than others. So some in
Yeah,
the chat that like might disagree, but
well, the chat's all over the place. The chat's getting hung up on Lamar Miller and some of these other guys. So that being said, so we would look elsewhere. I believe that was Rick that asked. There are plenty of other running back fish in the sea that we would jump on, and even guys like, I mean, I'm still scrolling through this list. Even at like 83, Austin Eckler's sitting there. Who knows what's going to happen in LA? I mean, Austin Eckler, like everywhere I've got Austin Eckler, I've had multiple offers
mm-hmm.
because people, I think the community as a whole is expecting there to be a holdout with Melvin Gordon into the season, and that really benefits Austin Eckler. So,
Okay.
so yeah, there's a lot of other guys that I would look at that are not Tevin Coleman. All right. So we'll hit these wide receivers last. So we'll jump over to the easy one and we'll talk tight end. Obviously, they have a lot of tight ends on their roster right now because we're at the 90-man rosters in training camp. But they really only have one tight end that anybody cares about, and that's George Kittle.
Mm-hmm.
Behind them, there is Levine Toilolo, who's just a pure blocker, and some rookies, and then Garrett Selleck, who's been on the 49ers, it feels like forever. But Kittle's the only one that's got any fantasy relevance, and he's very good. I mean, very good fantasy relevance. You know, obviously one of the top tight ends out there. So Anthony, I will never leave you guys alone. Sorry, Anthony wrote in the chat, "Leave us alone, Brad." So they're chatting on their own. So what's your take on Kittle? Is he safe enough for you? Is he a guy who's consistent enough for you? Are you afraid with all these running backs and wide receivers that his value dips? Where are you at with George Kittle?
Yeah, I love George Kittle. I had him on both of my teams last year, both of my dynasty teams. Obviously, I was not expecting that type of production. I think in my one dynasty league, where I admittedly am playing with guys that it was all of our first dynasty league when we started a couple years ago. I think I got Kittle off waivers at the beginning of the year, so that was quite a
That's a
grab.
steal.
But yeah, that I realize that's not normal, but I mean, I loved having him on my team. Obviously, he had a great year. I'm not as concerned about the regression that a lot of people are talking about. I realized that the numbers he put up were, for me, it's kind of similar to the Mahomes thing, where of course he's going to most likely regress a little bit, but it doesn't mean he's going to regress to the point of no longer being worth where he's being drafted. Now, granted, I have tried to move off of him in both of those leagues just to see if there's anybody out there that values him maybe even higher than where he is now. And I just typically, as an owner, don't value the tight end position as highly. I'd rather have other running backs or tight ends that are close there in value. But in one league, I haven't been able to unload him, and I'm totally fine holding on to him because I'm just not interested in selling at a discount unless I'm getting just like a king's ransom. I think he'll be completely fine with Jimmy G. He produces no matter who the quarterback is. And I think Shanahan obviously is going to trust him this year, so I don't imagine that they're going to forget that he's their best offensive weapon. At least he was last year. So I'm excited for him.
It's been a few months since last season, so I had to refresh myself on his numbers. And as I look at him, I'm like, wow, he has to come back down to earth. Not many
Mm-hmm.
tight ends get 136 targets, 88 catches for 1,377 yards, and 5 touchdowns. The 5 touchdowns is whatever, but I
Mm-hmm.
mean that's an over 60% catch rate. I mean that's huge numbers, and I can't see him getting anywhere near there. Like I would expect him to float around the 1,000 yard range. 5 touchdowns, I could easily see him increasing. I mean, that's a pretty low number, but man, 1,300 yards—that's a lot to ask for.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yep.
so I would expect him to still be elite and still stay in the. I think he's in the 30 range. I have been watching our ticker across the or our scrolling text across the bottom. I think he's like 31, 32, 33, somewhere in there. And he's definitely worth it. I mean, he's
Mm-hmm.
probably, arguably the best tight end in fantasy, depending on how you feel about Kelsey. So, yeah, there's not a lot to say about Kittle. I mean, he's fairly insulated value wise, no matter how many wide receivers and running backs they add to the team.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing about him is while we don't necessarily expect him to repeat exactly what he did last year, I mean, Kelsey's had three straight 1,000 yard seasons. Um, so I think if we think Kittle is as good as Kelsey, it's in the realm of possibility that he maybe doesn't hit 1,300 yards and only gets 1,000 to 1,100, but he also had a pretty low touchdown number for a team that struggled to score for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
So I know he's a nice run after catch weapon last year, but maybe getting more utilization in the red zone, drop the yardage and add a few touchdowns, and he's close to where he was last year fantasy wise. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. So I'm a big fan.
I agree. Agree completely. Buy, buy, buy. Draft, draft, draft. Although if you're buying, you're paying a king's ransom. I have him in a couple places, and folks wanted to try to trade. I wouldn't trade him.
Mm-hmm.
Like I had people throw out offers of multiple firsts, and because it's hard to get a really elite tight end in fantasy these days. There's really only probably two, three, maybe. I
Mm-hmm.
want to have one of those. In most cases, most of the leagues I'm in have a premium for tight ends where you're getting, 1.5 points per catch or something, something special that
Yep.
it's a value to have them. So I'm not dumping them very easily. It's going to take a lot more than most people would probably pay.
So if it wasn't picks and it was a player that is generally being drafted in the same area, so someone will give you an Amari Cooper, Adam Thielen, Leonard Fournette, are those types of guys you're considering or would consider as a straight up at a different position?
Not even close. No, just because wide receiver is such a deep position, you can get a lot of good
Yep.
value. No, running back, that would be purely on team makeup. Like if I for some odd reason started drafting and went like wide receiver, Kittle, and then had no running backs, and I'm purely talking redraft at this point. I wouldn't do this in a dynasty format. I would never draft 2 wide receivers in a row. Um, you know, I would probably consider it, but at that point, I would still need a really nice tight end back in the package. And most guys aren't going to give up a really nice running back, something in the 30 range, which is still, somebody like a Marlon Mack if you like Marlon Mack, Derrick Henry if you like Derrick Henry. Obviously, Josh Jacobs is there, Phillip Lindsay. I don't like Mark Ingram, so I'm not going to say Mark Ingram. Chris Carson, David Montgomery, those are all guys kind of in the 30 to 50 range. And I would need more than that. It would need to be, a nice running back, a nice tight end.
Yeah, and I think the hard part, too, about him being a tight end is a lot of other teams aren't if they're looking to fortify that position, they're looking to fortify it with a guy that, with it being such an awful position, unless you have one of the top 3, you've got your top 3. You've got O.J. Howard this year, Evan Ingram, and potentially Hunter Henry. If you think those guys are pretty close to locks as top 6, 7 guys. Most other teams, I think, then are trying to just find the guys that are going to finish anywhere from 8 to 12. And so they're not going to want to pay up to get that guy up top just because the cost it's going to be to get him. I just don't think a lot of people are going to give you the value you need to trade him away.
I would agree completely. So we've spent more time than I expected on George Kittle because he's kind of a lock, but it's good to talk about. It's good. It's important to help people understand why they're going to take these elite players and why it's smart to not move them. And that's the thing, especially on the dynasty side. Just because you have an elite player doesn't mean you have to try to move them to get a bunch of stuff. Elite guys are not easy to come by at some of those positions. So take them, keep them, enjoy them, and know that you've got one of the best. So. All right, so speaking of one of the best, I have no other one of the best to talk about because they've got a bunch of wide receivers that aren't the best of anything yet. So let's go through and talk about this massive amount of wide receivers. So right now, currently, they've got 11 receivers on the roster. Currently, their official depth chart is Jordan Matthews and Dante Pettis on the outside, Deebo Samuel in the slot. The backups on the outside are Marquise Goodwin and Jalen Hurd, and Trent Taylor is the backup in the slot. Then they've got behind that as their third stringers Kendrick Bourne, Chris Thompson, James Ritchie, Malik Henry, and Sean Poindexter. So it's laughable that Jordan Matthews is listed as a starter currently. I'm really surprised when I looked at their first unofficial depth chart that that Jordan Matthews is listed anywhere near a starting position. So I will let you kind of ramble and run with this. What do you take and what do you make of all of these wide receivers? Obviously the community over the offseason, the love and the hype for Dante Pettis has grown. Marquise Goodwin's kind of been left alone and nobody's really said anything good, bad, or otherwise. Deebo Samuel, you either love him or you hate him. And then everybody else has kind of been not talked about at all. So what's your take, Taylor?
Yeah, I mean, I shouldn't laugh too much about Jordan Matthews because I did take a flyer on him in one of my deep leagues when he signed because there's just so much uncertainty there. I told myself there is a possibility that there is some way that he gets some playing time. But, I mean, the 2 names that I wrote down for fantasy relevance for this year and kind of beyond, even if we think about Dynasty, is Pettis and Deebo. I had Goodwin. I guess you can consider him an honorable mention. I had him on a couple of my teams last year. And he is what he is. Not somebody that I was comfortable plugging into my lineup any given week. Also has struggled with some injuries and things like that. But like you said, the Pettis hype is getting a little out of control. Hasn't quite caught up to the Chris Godwin hype, but we're getting there. And yeah. I mean, Pettis missed some time with the knee injuries last year. Right now, most people are pegging him as probably the most valuable pass catcher in that offense behind Kittle. I mean, for what it's worth, depending on how much you read into training camp reports, there were some reports that He was dominating that. Those don't really impact too much how I view the player. Some people go with that pretty heavily. I know he's had a lot of targets in training camp. They were talking about he was tied for the most targets from Garoppolo with Trent Taylor, which we might talk about. I don't know. He's just a guy with Pettis with his price that I'm not super interested in taking because, as it seems like the theme of this offense, it's just kind of an unproven asset. So because I don't think he's tethered to an elite quarterback, at least I don't know that he is. I'm just not interested in taking him where he's being drafted. So I was looking at some of the wide receivers in the same area. Looked like Allen Robinson was going a few picks before him. Marvin Jones is going 13 picks after him. So you're talking like a whole round later. I would rather wait around and go get Marvin Jones and redraft. I think he's pretty undervalued as Kenny Golladay hype takes off again. Pettis is a guy that I'm more comfortable with as a probably wide receiver 4 or 5 because I think he is going to produce if he stays healthy. But I'm just not as high on him as most of the community is for fantasy football. So what are your thoughts on Pettis?
Yeah, when it comes to 49ers receivers, I think it has to be Pettis, then Deebo when it comes to kind of the dynasty value guys. If you listened last year, the 49ers like Trent Taylor a lot. So I could build the narrative that it's, Pettis and another veteran receiver on the outside and Trent Taylor as the slot to start the year, and Deebo kind of works his way into a starting position as the year goes on. I could see Trent Taylor early in the year getting some love, because he is good at what he does. He's a good slot receiver, but, his injuries, I think, will catch up to him. I think the important two are going to be Pettis and Deebo. Pettis, no matter who was throwing the ball, Pettis looked well last year, especially as a rookie. He played pretty well. And I think another year in the system and having a quarterback who's actually going to be more efficient is going to help him. I think Deebo is going to come on as the year goes on, and Deebo has the ability to, he reminds me a lot of Golden Tate. He can be sneaky and take the top off the defense, or he can run really nice, crisp underneath routes and get some nice, yards after the catch. Jordan Matthews, there were times where I was interested in Jordan Matthews when he was a rookie and early in his career, but that disappeared quickly. The injuries zapped any interest I had in him. So I think this is more laughable than anything. Jalen Hurd is a guy that I would stash just to see what happens, just because of just kind of his athleticism and his skill set. Maybe it could develop. I wouldn't expect anything out of him for 2 to 3 years if I was a betting man, which I'm not. But Kendrick Bourne, Marquise Goodwin, I have no interest in James Ritchie. I mean, these are all just camp bodies, guys that I don't see there being any value. So the big three for me would be Pettis, then Samuel, and then Hurd. I never bought into the Godwin hype, the Marquise Goodwin hype last year. I'm not going to buy into anything else. And I saw in the chat, Sully even mentioned that reports are that he's even on the roster bubble. So that being said, it could be a moot point any day now. He could be, as they cut down, they could get rid of him because he's older. I mean, he's got really good speed, but he's getting close to 30 where they've got young guys. Maybe they like Kendrick Bourne or James Ritchie and they want to keep him at the back of the roster. I don't know. So
yeah, I think when I'm talking about players that are kind of bunched together and you lack, other than Kittle, the proven pass catcher there in that offense. So if you're talking Pettis, Hurd, Deebo, Trent Taylor, if you like Trent Taylor, it's really just kind of who you like best because none of those guys have shown that for a full season they can produce the numbers that you might be expecting out of them. So I don't fault anybody for taking whichever of those guys they like best. I think for me, Deebo Samuel is the one that I like his ADP the most based on where he's being drafted around guys like I think Zay Jones, Sanu, Devontae Parker, they were around him. And I'll take a flyer in a redraft league on Deebo being maybe the guy that takes over as a wide receiver 1B or even a wide receiver 2 in that offense. And if I'm wrong, it doesn't cost me too much. I'd be a little wary of spending draft capital on Dante Pettis, thinking he's going to produce wide receiver one numbers on that team when we just haven't seen it. So, but I think they're also closely bunched together. I just don't want to be taking the guy that's being drafted earlier and then be wrong. So that's why I'm leaning more towards Deebo. And like you said, in a dynasty, I think Jalen Hurts a great pickup. Just heard some great things about him from camp. Again, for what it's worth, not a bad stash there either for a few years down the road, but I don't think he provides a ton of value for 2019.
Yeah, for sure. Agree. So yeah, I'm just kind of digging up and down the ADP to see, because I'm not as sold on Pettis as a lot of people are. I know the Pettis hype is very real, and you mentioned like Marvin Jones, and I'm just looking a little bit deeper, more like a round and a half later. Cortland Sutton, who proved a little bit more last year with less. Their quarterback last year was brutal. You're hearing talk already that Flacco and Sutton have built a little bit of a rapport, obviously early in camp, but they have a connection. Sutton is a guy that I loved last year. And at 95, I mean, he's still in the top 100, but at 95, I would definitely be more interested in waiting for him. At 90, you've got Corey Davis. I mean, that's both of those guys, and even at 84, Sammy Watkins. I know a lot of people are kind of hot and cold on him, but I love Sammy Watkins. I always been a big Sammy Watkins fan. So and even a pick behind him. I mean, some people love Christian Kirk. I mean, I kind of lump Kirk and Pettis together in the. I don't love them. I don't hate them. I mean, if the value makes sense, I'd take them. But yeah, so that's that. So what else have we got in here? So. Looking at the chat, I see Pettis is a flanker only to me, and Shanahan tends to look for split end types, a.k.a. Deebo. Looking at the stats from last year, yeah, I mean, it looked like last year when it came to the receivers, actually Kendrick Bourne got the most outside of George Kittle. Kendrick Bourne actually got 66 targets, and I think last year the position he played was... Let's see what we got here. So Bourne was playing in the same... He was playing on the outside, very similar to what Pettis was playing last year, role-wise in their offense. So, Pettis wound up having more catches. Like Rick said, Pettis is more efficient with what he was given. Definitely had a nice catch rate. So if Bourne doesn't still have value in that offense, I mean, you could easily make the case that Pettis gets close to 1,000 yards receiving, and something like, 70 receptions, 70 receptions, 1,000 yards, probably 6 or 7 touchdowns would be my guess if I was a guessing guy. So I think Pettis probably has the most value of the receivers this year. I think Deebo is my long-term favorite on this team of the guys that are there. So, any other thoughts about the receivers? I think we've hit them pretty hard. But is there anyone else you like? We didn't say a ton about Trent Taylor. Do you feel one way or the other about him?
No, I mean, he's a guy that going late enough in drafts that I'm again fine taking a flyer on him as he doesn't have that alpha dog makeup. But of course, if he can slide into the slot there, great. My concerns with that is always the competition with Deebo, the shiny new toy that Shanahan has, potentially stealing away from him a little bit. I think Pettis probably is the most talented there, but other than that, there are a lot of players that are pretty close to me. I think talent-wise, I'd probably go like Pettis, Deebo, and then after that, just a lot of question marks. So Trent Taylor surely could rise to the top as the third best receiver on that team, but I just think when they have a tight end like that, I almost consider Kittle as their first receiver, and then Pettis potentially their second, and now Deebo and Trent Taylor are fighting for their third receiver. And so if you miss out on Trent Taylor, he's now the fourth option on that team in the passing offense, and he's not going to return any value. But again, late enough in a draft. I like playing the ADP game, so if he's late enough there, surely take a flyer on him and see how he produces.
Well, and the tough thing for Taylor, I mean, obviously the injuries are a concern, but the dude's only like 5'8" and like 180
Mm-hmm.
pounds. I mean, he's super little. In the slot, he could play, that could be a good role for him. But in the slot, I mean, he's taking a lot of stuff over the middle. He's going against, 250-pound linebackers. I mean, that are
Yeah.
probably as fast as he is. It's like that's just a dangerous size game, and that would scare me. But it would not be surprising to me if they started three wide receivers week one, and it's Pettis, Deebo, Taylor, or if Jordan Matthews somehow makes it, and this official depth chart is really what they do. It's Pettis, Jordan Matthews, Trent Taylor, and Deebo's kind of the they're going to work him in guy. So I can make the case that Taylor gets some opportunity, but I also see him getting hurt just as easily because of his smaller size and the position that he plays. That's really really scary, especially for somebody like that.
Yeah, his workout metrics on Player Profiler aren't pretty. So he's
No,
got a 95th percentile agility score, which is great. Everything else, I mean, you think a
pretty
small
weak.
guy, you think a fast, and he's quick, I guess, but bad 40-yard dash, bad speed score, bad burst score, very low percentiles, 22nd percentile or lower and everything. So he's not a guy that's a superior athlete to anybody on the field, which, I mean, we've got plenty of players that have shown you don't have to be the best athlete on the field to produce. But again, his size, his poor workout metrics, I'm just, yeah, not somebody that I'm super interested in, or I guess not somebody I'm expecting a lot out of.
Agreed. I could make the case that he has some opportunity this year. I could also make the case that he's out of the league within a couple of years because of the injuries keep piling up, and that's tough. I mean, he's in a tough spot at the wide receiver position because you have a lot of different. There's going to be a lot of expectations for him. So yeah, Paul, we both agree that Kittle, Debo, and Pettis are kind of their top three receivers now and going forward. Uh, Yeah. So yeah, you're preach to the choir. We agree with you, Paul. Good call on that. Those are kind of their big three, and those are a good big three. I mean, moving forward, if Pettis and Debo both continue to
Mm-hmm.
develop, I mean, that's a really solid combination of skill players. So, and once they figure out who their running back is, once they find one that can survive, which may still wind up being next year in the 2020 draft, that's still a really nice offense to be a part of. So. Um,
Yeah, I think this time of year is a good time if you own the Pettises or Godwins that are seeing the hype train take off. If you're not one of the guys that believes in them, it's a great time to be trading them, especially in dynasty leagues where there is somebody in your league that loves Pettis and
yep.
there's somebody in your league that loved Deebo as a rookie. So these are guys though that are, while unproven assets, I think they're easy assets to get out from under if you don't like them. Whereas when we were talking to someone like Jerick McKinnon before, he's not someone you can get out from under right now. You've got to hold them. So at least with these guys, you've got options. Whether you like them or believe in them or not, somebody does.
For sure. Absolutely. So, as we close things out, do you have any other final thoughts about the 49ers? Is there anything else pressing that we didn't talk about that you wanted to bring up? How are you feeling about this team as a whole moving forward? Are they making good decisions with the roster management? What's kind of your final thoughts on the 49ers? That good, eh? Think I might have lost him, so we will.
Uh,
Oh, there he is. Yeah, maybe not. Okay, well, we will go ahead and wrap this thing up. So, thank you guys for joining me tonight. Thank you for hanging out with us and listening to us talk about the 49ers. Don't forget to go over to iTunes or any of your other favorite podcast locations and look for the Dynasty Football Heat Seekers. I did see Rick post today that we have been approved by iTunes, so it's out there for all of you Apple fans. Make sure you jump out there and subscribe and comment and like it and all the other good stuff that you can do with it. Share, send to everybody over to iTunes to listen to the Dynasty Football Heat Seekers. Don't forget Sully's 2 cents. We've got a lot of other great content that's coming your way. Stick to us. Stick close to rotoheat.com for all your news, your notes, your information. Check us out on twitch.tv/rotoheat. Find us over on YouTube. Our boy Craig and I and a few of the other team have started putting down individual player breakdowns. Go check those out and listen to them, and leave us a comment. Let us know how you feel about our breakdowns. See if you like them, don't like them. We always love to hear back from the folks, from the individuals that are out there. So you guys take care. We will see you again tomorrow night for another episode of the Heat Seekers, where we break down another team's fantasy perspectives. For Taylor, I am Brad. Thank you guys. Have a great night.